This is SpaceTime Series 27, Episode 95, for broadcast on the 7th of August 2024. Coming up on SpaceTime, Mercury in the sky with diamonds, new details on the brightest gamma-ray burst of all time, and more spectacular auroral activity seen across the Earth as the Sun moves closer to solar max. All that and more coming up on SpaceTime.
Welcome to SpaceTime with Stuart Gary.
A new study claims the planet Mercury, the nearest rock to the Sun, may harbour a thick layer of solid diamond deep below its ancient surface. Now, if confirmed, the findings reported in the journal Nature Communications may help solve some of the planet's biggest mysteries, including Mercury's strange composition and its unusual magnetic field. The study suggests diamonds could be forming a layer with an average thickness of about 15 kilometres at a depth of about 485 kilometres below the surface. A massive diamond layer, hundreds of kilometres below the crust, would explain tiny Mercury's magnetic field. A massive diamond layer, hundreds of kilometres below the crust, could help explain Mercury's weak magnetic field. As this planet's no longer thought to be geologically active, scientists figured its magnetic field was being generated through interactions with the solar wind, the constant stream of charged particles flowing out from the Sun. But a diamond layer deep down could transfer heat between Mercury's core and its mantle, creating enough temperature difference to cause liquid iron to form, swirl, and generate a magnetic field. The planet Mercury is hypothesized to have formed just like the other terrestrial rocky worlds in our solar system. Initially through the condensation of gas into tiny grains in the protoplanetary disk, which then begin to cling together through electrostatic charge, and later through the accretion of larger particles gravitationally, forming a protoplanetary magma ocean, which eventually cools to form the planet. Now, as the planet cooled and differentiated, heavy materials formed an unusually large metallic core, while lighter materials like silicon and carbon formed the planet's mantle and crust. This tiny, heavily created world has unusually light surface patches which NASA's Messenger spacecraft identified as graphite, a form of carbon. But that high carbon content suggests that something unusual must have happened within the planet. Scientists thought the temperature and pressure of Mercury's mantle were high enough to allow carbon to form graphite, which, being lighter than the rest of the mantle, would have floated to the surface. But there are other studies which suggest that Mercury's mantle could be up to 140 kilometres deeper than previously thought, and that would have increased the temperature and pressure at the boundary between the core and mantle. And that could have created the sorts of conditions where carbon could crystallise into diamond rather than graphite. One of the study's authors, Oliver Namor from KU Leuven, says the diamond could have been formed by two processes. Firstly, through the crystallization of the magma ocean, which then created a very thin diamond layer at the core mantle boundary. And secondly, through the crystallization of part of the planet's core. Now, to investigate this hypothesis, the authors created chemical simulations containing iron, silica and carbon in compositions similar to certain meteorites, which they think would have simulated the planet's magma ocean. Now, they also included differing levels of iron sulfide in the mix. That's because Mercury's surface is also rich in sulfur. Then, using a moldable anvil press, the authors subjected these various mixtures to crushing pressures of 7 gigapascals. Now, that's some 70,000 times the pressure of Earth's atmosphere at sea level, and temperatures of up to 1,970 degrees Celsius to simulate the sorts of conditions found deep inside the planet near the core mantle boundary. And they also used computer simulations to determine the physical conditions under which graphite or diamond would be stable. The experiments also showed that minerals such as olivine likely formed in the mantle, a finding that was consistent with previous studies. However, by adding sulfur, it caused it all to solidify at much higher temperatures, and such conditions are more favourable for forming diamonds than graphite. And indeed, the team's computer simulations showed that under these revised conditions, diamonds may have crystallised as Mercury's inner core solidified. And because the diamonds are less dense than the iron core, they then floated up to the core mantle boundary. Of course, all this is hypothesis. A joint European Space Agency and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency mission called Bepi Colombo is now on its way to Mercury. Launched back in 2018, the multiprobe spacecraft is expected to achieve Mercury orbit insertion later next year. Needless to say, we'll be watching its results very closely. This is SpaceTime. Still to come, the brightest gamma-ray burst of all time, and more spectacular auroral activity seen across planet Earth as the Sun nears closer to solar max. All that and more still to come on SpaceTime. Astronomers have identified a new feature in the boat, the brightest gamma-ray burst of all time. A report in the journal Science claims NASA's Fermi Gamma-Ray Space Telescope identified the feature in the brightest gamma-ray burst ever seen. Back in October 2022, astronomers were stunned by what was quickly dubbed the boat, the brightest of all time gamma-ray burst. And a few minutes after the boat erupted, Fermi's gamma-ray burst monitor recorded an unusual energy peak. The study's lead author, Maria Edvidge-Ravasio from Radboud University, says the energy peak surprised everyone. Ravasio's analysis shows it to be the highest confidence emission peak ever seen in 50 years of studying gamma-ray bursts. See, when matter interacts with light, the energy can be absorbed and then re-emitted in characteristic ways. These interactions can brighten or dim specific colours, or really energies, producing key features when the light gets spread out rainbow-like in a spectrum. And these features reveal a wealth of information, including the chemical elements involved in the interaction. At higher energies, spectral features can uncover specific particle processes, such as matter and antimatter annihilating each other to produce gamma rays. While some previous studies have reported possible evidence of absorption and emission features in other gamma-ray bursts, subsequent studies have shown that these could have simply been statistical fluctuations. But what the authors saw in the boat was very different. In fact, the odds of this feature being nothing more than a noise fluctuation are less than 1 chance in 500 million. Gamma-ray bursts are the most powerful explosions in the universe since the Big Bang itself. They emit copious amounts of gamma rays, the highest energy form of light. Most gamma-ray bursts occur when the cores of massive stars exhaust their fuel supplies and then suddenly collapse, resulting in a massive shock wave and blast before everything is quickly sucked in again, forming a black hole. And matter falling into that black hole then powers oppositely directed particle jets that blast through the star's outer layers at close to the speed of light. Astronomers are able to detect these gamma-ray bursts when one of these jets points almost directly towards the Earth. Now, the boat, formerly known as GRB 221009A, erupted on October 9, 2022, and promptly saturated most of the gamma-ray detectors in orbit, including those on Fermi. This, therefore, prevented them from measuring the most intense parts of the blast. Reconstructed observations coupled with statistical arguments suggest the boat, if part of the same population of gamma-ray bursts as previously detected bursters, was likely the brightest burst to appear in Earth's skies in at least the last 10,000 years. Putative emission line appears almost 5 minutes after the burst was detected, and well after it had dimmed enough to end the saturation effects on Fermi. The line persisted for at least 40 seconds, and the emission reached a peak energy of about 12 million electron volts. Now, for comparison, the energy of visible light ranges from 2 to 3 electron volts. So, that begs the question, what produced this spectral feature? Now, the authors think the most likely source was the elimination of electrons and their antimatter counterparts, positrons. When electrons, which are negatively charged, and positrons, which are positively charged, collide, they annihilate each other, producing a pair of gamma rays with an energy of around 0.511 megaelectron volts. And because the astronomers were looking into the jet, where the matter is moving at close to light speed, the emission becomes greatly blue-shifted, pushed towards much higher energies. Now, if this interpretation is correct, to produce an emission peaking at 12 megaelectron volts, the annihilating particles must have been moving towards us at around 99.9% the speed of light. What's amazing is after decades of studying these incredible cosmic explosions, scientists still don't fully understand the details of how these jets work. So, finding clues like this remarkable emission line will help them investigate this extreme environment more deeply. This report from NASA TV.
In late 2022, the brightest gamma-ray burst ever seen shocked astronomers and even temporarily blinded many high-energy detectors in space. Now, a study of the first few minutes of this burst have found an important feature not seen before. Gamma-ray bursts are the most powerful explosions in the cosmos. One that occurred October 9, 2022, was quickly dubbed the BOAT, the brightest of all time. Events like it may occur in Earth's skies only once every 10,000 years. As with most gamma-ray bursts, the BOAT arose from the death of a massive star. When its core ran out of fuel, it collapsed, creating a black hole in the star's center. Matter swirled toward the black hole, and some of it was thrown out along two jets moving near the speed of light. The jets drilled their way out of the star and blasted into space. We see a gamma-ray burst when one of these jets happens to point almost directly at Earth. That happens somewhere in the sky almost every day. The closer to head-on we view a jet, the brighter it appears. This, along with an unusually narrow jet, is what made the BOAT so exceptional. NASA's Fermi Observatory carries instruments specifically designed for studying these explosions. Its gamma-ray burst monitor was saturated by the BOAT's initial flash, but was fine a few minutes later. And it's in that data, around 5 minutes into the event, that scientists found something new. It's an emission line, a narrow band of enhanced brightness in light spread out in a spectrum. It only lasted 40 seconds, but it's the first one ever seen with high confidence during a burst. It gives scientists insight into processes within parts of the jet where gamma rays, the highest energy form of light, come from. Researchers say it's likely produced by electrons and their antimatter twins, positrons, colliding and annihilating within the jet. Each collision produces a pair of gamma rays, but it also works backwards. Two gamma rays can collide to form an electron and a positron. In the jet's environment, both processes occur, so there are plenty of particles to go around. For this to explain what Fermi saw, the gamma rays had to have been shifted to higher energies by their motion. This is similar to a siren rising in pitch as it races toward us. To get that boost, the particles emitting the gamma ray line must have been moving at 99.9% the speed of light. After decades of studying GRBs, scientists know little about the processes within these incredible jets, yet they're a staple of the cosmos. Now, Fermi has given us a brief glimpse inside.
This is SpaceTime. Still to come, more spectacular auroral activity seen across planet Earth, signifying solar max is getting closer. And later in the science report, archaeologists discover the earliest man-made tools ever found in Europe. All that and more still to come on SpaceTime. The latest sunspot figures for July have just been published, showing we now have the highest monthly average sunspot activity for 20 years, and some 50 points higher than the highest value at this time during the last solar cycle. All this activity's triggered another solar storm lighting up planet Earth's skies with more spectacular auroral light shows. The colourful display was a repeat of that observed back in April and May this year, as an extremely active group of sunspots traversed across the Earth-facing side of the Sun. Sunspots are cooler regions of the Sun's visible surface. They're caused by magnetic field lines from deep inside the Sun stretching out into space. Because different latitudes of the Sun rotate at different speeds, these magnetic field lines become stretched and twisted, eventually snapping and reconnecting explosively, triggering violent bursts of energy called solar flares, which can be powerful enough to fling magnetic field and solar plasma dip into space as coronal mass ejections. Now, if these solar flares and coronal mass ejections erupt as they face the Earth, they can cause our planet's magnetic field to wobble like jello. And this is what we call a geomagnetic storm, more commonly referred to as space weather. The charged particles can penetrate the shielding usually provided by the Earth's magnetic field. That results in damage to spacecraft. It can affect communications and navigation systems. It can black out power grids on the Earth's surface. And it increases radiation exposure for astronauts and even people in high-flying aircraft. The charged particles from these solar storms also travel along the Earth's magnetic field lines towards the planet's north and south magnetic poles. And as these streams of plasma travel through the Earth's upper atmosphere, they collide with oxygen and nitrogen atoms and molecules, causing them to excite and emit photons, giving off a glow and producing colourful curtain-like displays known as the northern and southern lights, the aurora borealis and aurora australis. The colours being emitted depend on which particles are being ionised. The reddish-brown glows are caused by collisions of particles with single oxygen atoms in the Earth's upper atmosphere, usually higher than 300 kilometres. Now, lower down in the atmosphere, a green hue is created by single oxygen atoms being hit down to altitudes of around 100 kilometres. And the kaleidoscope turns a whitish yellow beige when nitrogen is mixed in with the oxygen. Aurorae also exhibit blue, red and even purple glows in the lower atmosphere. That's caused by the excitation of molecular nitrogen below 100 kilometres. Now, all these space weather events tend to build up, becoming more and more frequent and violent as the Sun reaches the climax of its 11-year solar cycle, called solar maximum. The current solar cycle, 25, began back in 2019, and it should reach solar maximum any time from now through to the middle of next year. Over the past week or so, both solar flares and coronal mass ejections have battered the Earth. That's triggered some spectacular auroral displays. They've been observed not just at higher latitudes where they normally occur, but even at lower down latitudes, well into the continental United States in the northern hemisphere. While south of the equator, areas as far north as Tasmania and southern Victoria and Western Australia have also experienced the spectacular light shows. This is SpaceTime. And time now to take another brief look at some of the other stories making news in science this week with the Science Report. Scientists from Charles Darwin University have declared a global biodiversity tipping point has been reached with confirmation of the first marine fish extinctions. A species of ray, so rare it's only ever been recorded once, that was in the late 1800s, has now been formally declared extinct following an assessment by an international team of marine biologists and environmental scientists. The loss of the Java stingaree, a small relative of stingrays, is the first confirmed marine fish extinction directly attributable to human activity. The news comes as the International Union for the Conservation of Nature released its latest updated red list of threatened species. The Java stingaree was only known from a single specimen collected in 1862 from a fish market in Jakarta. The study's authors conducted new modelling encompassing all available information on the species, which has revealed that the Java stingaree is now in fact extinct. Scientists have blamed intensive and generally unregulated fishing, resulting in the depletion of the Java stingaree population, with coastal fish catches in the Java Sea already declining by the 1870s. The northern coast of Java, particularly Java Bay, where the species was known to occur, is also heavily industrialised, with extensive long-term habitat loss and degradation due to pollution. Scientists say that all these impacts were severe enough to unfortunately cause the extinction of the species. What that means for the rest of the ecosystem is yet to be realised. A new study claims that taking between 9 and 10,000 steps daily may counteract the risk of death and cardiovascular disease in highly sedentary people. The findings, reported in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, looked at data on 72,174 Brits fitted with fitness trackers for a week. They found that every additional step up to around 10,000 per day reduced the risk of death and heart disease, regardless of how much time was spent being sedentary. They calculated that the optimal number of steps per day to counteract high sedentary time was between 9,000 and 10,000, which lowered the risk of premature death by 39% and heart disease by 21%. In both cases, 50% of the benefit was achieved at between 4,000 and 4,500 steps per day. Now, the authors acknowledge that this type of study can't prove cause and effect. But they say people with sedentary lifestyles, such as office workers, may benefit from any amount of daily steps above, say, 2,200. Archaeologists have discovered the earliest man-made tools ever found in Europe. A report in the journal Nature claims artefacts from an archaeological dig site at Korolovo in the Ukraine are estimated to be around 1.4 million years old, making them the earliest securely dated evidence for the presence of early hominids in Europe. The authors were able to estimate the age of the mud in which the artefacts, including stone tools, were buried. They also investigated what conditions would have been like back there at that time, and they believe these early humans probably exploited warmer weather periods between ice ages to move into more mountainous areas. Social media companies have grown to become some of the most powerful media forces on the planet. Their influence is now all-empowering. But time and time again, they've used that power to spread lies and manipulate the public for political gain. Social media claim they're nothing more than a village town square. But in fact, they're actually acting like publishers, editorializing on issues. And if that's the case, shouldn't they be treated as such under the same laws as regular publishers? With the details, we're joined by technology editor Alex Zaharov-Reutt from TechAdvice.life.
Well, absolutely. I mean, social media organizations are indeed publishers. They're publishing things all the time. On X, for example, you actually now have Grok, which is summarizing a whole bunch of news items in its news section for you to have a look at. I mean, they're publishing news. Social media organizations use the cover of not being publishers to be able to skirt around the First Amendment in the US, where freedom of speech is guaranteed.
Does that tell you something about the power they have over politicians?
Well, it certainly does, yeah. I mean, no politician wants to be censored, cancelled, or otherwise besmirched by these social media giants. But there needs to be some sort of reckoning where these organizations are treated like everybody else in terms of the First Amendment being paramount. I mean, 1984, the famous novel by George Orwell, I mean, it's been said many times, that was meant to be a piece of fiction, not an instruction manual. I mean, people are still being banned off YouTube. How is Google and YouTube allowed to do those sorts of things?
YouTube have a long history of corrupt fact checkers. They don't check facts, they're pushing their own political agenda.
And that's why you've seen a big upsurge in people using Rumble and BitChute and Odyssey and Brightest. YouTube is no longer the only platforms and all the rest.
The phone market's gone up in value.
Yes, well, over the second quarter of 2024, phone sales are up 12%. So some of the downturns in sales we saw in 2023 because inflation was spiking and, the cost of products was going up, it seems to have moderated somewhat. Apple's iPhones are top of the charts in every major area except France, where the Galaxy A15, which is decidedly a mid-range or even lower-end phone, is selling, whereas Apple's phones are all premium devices. And, of course, the big surge in sales of AI-powered phones is starting to happen. I mean, Samsung launched their AI phones earlier this year. They now have the second generation of AI devices with the Fold and Flip. Sixth generation. Google's new phones come on August 13. It's no secret they've publicly announced it themselves. And, of course, Apple's phones with Apple Intelligence will be arriving with the iPhone 16 range in September, and the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max will be able to use the AI goodness too when it launches later this year, although most of the features won't launch until 2025.
Yeah, well, we're talking about Apple. They've just launched 17.6, their latest iOS, and also there's a beta 18 version out as well.
Yeah, with 17.6, you've got one of the US cyber agencies advising people to update as soon as they can. There are 35 vulnerabilities that have been closed, and if you are using an older version of iOS, or even, you're not using the latest version, which is 17.6, the hackers can break into those phones. They can do infected websites to try and force your phone to download something and trick you into tapping the OK button. And then the hackers can be spying on you, getting apps to look for private information when they've been told not to. I mean, in theory, they can turn on your camera and microphone. So definitely, if you've got any Apple device, iPhone, iPad, Mac, Apple Watch, Apple TV, etc., check for an update. And then with iOS 18, the beta versions are out, but there's also now 18.1 as a special developer version. It's very unusual to have an 18.1 before the actual 18.0 is even out. But this is introducing the new Apple Intelligence features, which allow you to to rewrite content and summarize it. Eventually, you'll be able to also do the image generation. You can also now do the phone call recording and get a transcription and a summary. But again, this is only for the developer version. And if you're not a developer, it's not a good idea to put it on because it will make your phone unstable. But plenty of people are giving it a shot. And of course, developers are loving it because they can now start playing with all of the Apple Intelligence features, or at least a subset of them. And again, many of the features will be rolling out over the rest of this year when it finally launches.
That's Alex Zaharov-Reut from techadvice.life. And that's the show for now. SpaceTime is available every Monday, Wednesday and Friday through Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Pocket Casts, Spotify, Acast, Amazon Music, Bytes.com, SoundCloud, YouTube, your favourite podcast download provider, and from spacetimewithstuartgary.com. SpaceTime's also broadcast through the National Science Foundation on Science Zone Radio and on both iHeartRadio and TuneIn Radio. And you can help to support our show by visiting the SpaceTime store for a range of promotional merchandising goodies, or by becoming a SpaceTime patron, which gives you access to triple episode commercial-free versions of the show, as well as lots of bonus audio content which doesn't go to air, access to our exclusive Facebook group, and other rewards. Just go to spacetimewithstuartgary.com for full details.
You've been listening to SpaceTime with Stuart Gary. This has been another quality podcast production from Bytes.com.